They're asking for you. The gallery assistant's voice trembled just enough to betray her nerves. I didn't move. Beyond the velvet curtain, applause crashed through the exhibition hall like waves striking glass. Camera shutters clicked without pause. Champagne flutes chimed together. Every masterpiece hanging under those expensive lights had been painted by my hands. Every signature beneath them belonged to someone else. Liam, the assistant whispered again. Director Evelyn says the press wants a statement. A slow smile touched my lips. Then she should give them one. The assistant stared. But they think you coordinated the exhibition. I did. They're calling it Director Hale's greatest collection. I know. She waited for anger, for denial, for shouting. Instead, I folded the inventory ledger shut and placed it carefully inside the drawer. I resigned this morning. The color drained from her face. You what? I won't be attending the ceremony. But this is your life's work. No. I picked up my old canvas bag from beside the desk. It was outside the preparation room. The gallery roared with celebration. Evelyn Hale stood beneath a crystal chandelier in an ivory suit, accepting another standing ovation. My mentor, one journalist said into a microphone, "You've reinvented contemporary realism." She laughed with effortless elegance. Art is never the work of one person. I nearly admired the sentence. Nearly. For 12 years, I had believed those words. I painted through fevers. I restored damaged canvases until my fingertips bled. I canceled exhibitions under my own name because Evelyn said, "Our reputation comes first." Our. The smallest lie was often hidden inside the kindest word. The assistant caught up with me before I reached the service exit. "You can't leave." "I already have." "What if she asks where you are?" I handed her an envelope. "Give this to the board tomorrow morning." She looked at the seal. "What's inside?" "My final contribution." She reached for another question. I was already gone. Rain washed the city into silver reflections. My apartment wasn't far from the museum district. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. I boiled water for instant coffee instead of opening the expensive wine collectors kept gifting Evelyn. My phone vibrated. 23 missed calls. All from the gallery. Then another. "Evelyn." I watched it ring. "Stop." "Ring again." Finally, I answered. Her voice arrived before I could speak. "Where are you?" "Home." "What are you doing?" "Packing." A pause. "What joke is this?" "I don't think either of us is laughing." "You abandoned your own exhibition." I resigned. "You what?" "I sent the paperwork." Another silence. This one colder. "You don't resign before the most important night of your career." It wasn't my career. It was ours. I closed my eyes. There it is again. What? That word. "Liam, I built your empire because I believed we were building something together." "We were." "Were we?" She sighed dramatically, as though I had become unreasonable overnight. "You've always been emotional after finishing a major project." I almost laughed. Emotional. That was how she explained exhaustion. Burnout. Being ignored. Years earlier, when a collector complimented one of my compositions during a private viewing, Evelyn had smiled warmly before saying, "Liam has wonderful technical skills." Technical. As though inspiration belonged only to her. "I'll send someone to pick you up," she continued. "No. This discussion isn't happening over the phone. It already happened. You signed a contract. I fulfilled it. You owe this gallery." "No." I looked around my tiny apartment. Stacks of sketchbooks. Half-finished landscapes. A cracked wooden easel. Everything I actually loved had never belonged to the gallery. "I don't owe anyone another painting." Her breathing changed. Not anger. Calculation. "Is this about the retrospective next spring?" "No." "The overseas partnership?" "No." "The board?" "No." "Then what?" I answered quietly. "I'm simply done protecting you." The line went silent. She recovered quickly. "I don't know what fantasy you've created in your head, but you'll regret walking away." "I don't think I will." "You have nowhere else to go." That sentence should have frightened me. Instead, it confirmed everything. "You sound very certain." "I am." "We'll talk tomorrow." "There won't be a tomorrow for us." I ended the call. The apartment settled back into silence. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. Inside, I opened a worn leather notebook. Page after page contained dates, emails, purchase orders, digital archive numbers, insurance records, authentication reports. Everything. Not because I planned revenge. Because I had spent years cleaning up mistakes no one else even noticed. Patterns reveal themselves when you're always the one left behind after everyone else goes home. And Evelyn had stopped being careful a long time ago. Near midnight, another message arrived. Unknown number. Congratulations on finally leaving. My fingers froze. Another message appeared. You don't know me personally, but I know what happened to Noah Chun. The coffee mug slipped from my hand. It shattered across the kitchen floor. Noah. No one at the gallery had spoken his name in 8 years. I stared at the broken ceramic scattered across the floor while the phone buzzed again. Don't delete these messages. You were never the first. My thumb hovered over the screen. Finally, I typed. Who is this? The reply came almost instantly. Someone who also survived, Evelyn Hale. A photograph appeared. It was grainy, obviously taken years ago. 3 young artists stood together in a restoration studio. I recognized myself immediately, thinner, exhausted, smiling despite the dark circles under my eyes. Beside me stood Noah Chun. The third person had been cropped away. Noah's smile caught in my chest like broken glass. He had vanished from the art world without explanation. Officially, he had accepted an overseas residency. Unofficially, people whispered he couldn't handle the pressure. Evelyn never allowed questions. Artists burn out, she would say with sympathetic eyes. The gallery believed her. I believed her too. Until tonight. Another message arrived. Meet me tomorrow. 9 o'clock. Riverside Archive Cafe. Attached was a location pin. No name. No explanation. Only one final sentence. Bring the envelope's duplicate. You'll need it before the board opens yours. I slowly looked toward my bookshelf. Hidden behind old portfolios rested a second sealed envelope. Only 3 people in the world should have known it existed. One of them was me. The other had died. Or so I'd been told. Morning arrived beneath low gray clouds. The cafe overlooked the river, surrounded by abandoned warehouses that had become artist studios decades earlier. I arrived 15 minutes early. Old habit. Every exhibition began with preparation. At exactly 9, a woman in a navy coat sat across from me without asking permission. She looked to be in her early 40s. Sharp eyes. Calm posture. No wasted movement. You came, she said. You knew I would. I hoped. She ordered tea before introducing herself. Rachel Song. The name meant nothing. You worked with Noah, she continued. I barely knew him. You knew the version Evelyn allowed. A server placed 2 cups between us. Neither of us touched them. Rachel slid a thin folder across the table. Open it. Inside lay photocopies. Contracts. Invoices. Authentication certificates. Several bore my handwriting. Except, the signatures authorizing sales had been altered. My stomach tightened. I never approved these. I know. Where did you get them? I've been collecting evidence for 6 years. I looked up sharply. Against Evelyn? Against everyone. Everyone. Not just Evelyn. What exactly is happening? Rachel leaned back. You think your mentor stole your credit? She did. No. Rachel's expression remained painfully steady. She stole much more than that. She removed another photograph. This one showed a museum in Zurich. Hanging in the center gallery was a painting I knew better than my own reflection. I had destroyed it. Personally. 5 years ago. Its pigments had reacted badly during restoration. The collector witnessed the damage. Insurance covered the loss. The painting had been declared beyond recovery. Yet there it was. Perfect. Impossible. That's not possible, I whispered. It shouldn't be. It was destroyed. Rachel nodded. Then why is it hanging in Europe? Cold spread through my chest. Forgery. Replacement. Insurance fraud. Questions collided so quickly I couldn't separate one from another. Rachel watched every realization cross my face. Now you understand why I contacted you. I looked down at the duplicate envelope in my bag. What exactly is inside yours? She asked. Maintenance records. And digital restoration logs. And I hesitated. The originals. Rachel finally smiled. A man who spends 12 years documenting every brushstroke. I was doing my job. You were unknowingly preserving evidence. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows. The cafe suddenly felt much smaller. My phone vibrated. Gallery board chairman. Ignored. Again. Rachel folded her hands. They'll open your resignation envelope at 10. They'll think it's paperwork. It is. I met her eyes. They won't realize what's attached. The board envelope hadn't contained accusations. Only my resignation. my access credentials, an illegally certified inventory of every original restoration file under my control. The moment they processed my departure, every missing document would become impossible to hide. Rachel's voice dropped. Evelyn believes losing you is an inconvenience. I looked through the rain toward the distant silhouette of the museum. She's about to discover it was the beginning. Across the river, church bells struck 10. Somewhere inside the gallery, the boardroom door was opening, and someone was breaking the seal on the envelope I had quietly left behind. The boardroom fell silent before anyone spoke. I wasn't there, but by noon I knew exactly how the morning had unfolded. Not because someone told me, because people always behaved predictably when the foundation beneath their feet began to crack. My phone vibrated for the 12th time. Arthur Bennett, board chairman. I ignored it. Another call, then another. By the 15th attempt, the phone stopped ringing. A message arrived instead. This concerns the gallery's future. We need to talk. Need. Not want. Not request. Need. The shift in language almost made me smile. For 12 years, meetings had been scheduled around Evelyn's availability. Now the board was chasing the man who had quietly disappeared through the service exit. I poured another cup of coffee before opening my sketchbook. A half-finished watercolor waited beneath the morning light. For years I had forgotten what it felt like to paint without deadlines, without approvals, without wondering whose signature would eventually replace my own. The brush hovered over the paper, then stopped. The doorbell rang. Once. Twice. I already knew who stood outside. When I opened the door, Evelyn Hale looked immaculate despite the storm. Cream-colored coat, pearl earrings, perfect posture. Only her eyes betrayed her. She hadn't slept. You ignored the board. I wasn't expecting visitors. She brushed past me before I invited her inside. Old habits. She always entered rooms as though they already belonged to her. Her gaze swept across my apartment. The unfinished paintings. The old wooden easel. The cracked mugs. She frowned. You've always lived like this? I've always preferred honesty. What does that mean? I closed the door quietly. It means I never needed expensive furniture to convince myself I'd become someone important. A flash of irritation crossed her face, then disappeared. She turned back into the composed director everyone admired. The board opened your envelope. I assumed they would. They have questions. They finally should. She took a careful breath. Whatever misunderstanding this is, we can resolve it privately. There isn't a misunderstanding. You submitted archive inventories that should never have left internal storage. They belong to my department. They belong to the gallery. They belong to history. Silence stretched between us. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. She walked toward my easel. A landscape rested upon it. Nothing spectacular. Just morning light over an empty harbor. She stared longer than expected. You painted this yesterday. Yes. It has more life than the exhibition. I know. That answer unsettled her. She looked back sharply. You've been holding back. No. I've watched you struggle for years. You watched me work. I gave you opportunities. You gave me assignments. I made your career. I laughed. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Simply because the sentence no longer had power over me. No. She stiffened. What? You introduced me to institutions. I met her gaze without anger. I made my career. Her lips tightened. You've changed. I stopped asking for permission. For the first time since arriving, she looked uncertain. Not frightened. Not yet. Simply uncertain. What exactly do you think happens next? She asked. I paint. And I sleep. And after that, I wake up. She stared as though expecting something more dramatic. A lawsuit. Threats. Demands. Instead, she found only quiet certainty. Her voice sharpened. The board is conducting an audit. I know. They'll question everyone. They should. If mistakes were made. Mistakes. She looked away for half a second. Half a second was enough. I trusted you, she said. I know. You owe me loyalty. I gave you 12 years. You can't abandon me now. There it was. Not the gallery. Not the artists. Not the truth. Me. She wanted me back in my old position. Cleaning. Explaining. Absorbing blame. I already left. You don't understand the consequences. I understand them better than anyone. She stepped closer. If the gallery falls. It won't. She blinked. What? The gallery deserves to survive. And me? I didn't answer immediately. Because the honest answer wasn't cruel. It was simply inevitable. That depends on what you've built. She left 20 minutes later. Without shouting. Without slamming the door. She believed she could still contain the damage. She had spent too many years succeeding through confidence to imagine confidence might finally fail. When the elevator doors closed behind her, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. My phone rang again. Rachel. Did she visit? How did you know? She visited everyone else before you. What happened? Rachel sighed. The audit has already uncovered discrepancies. How many? Enough. Specifics. They found restoration records that don't match shipping manifests. I leaned against the kitchen counter. That's only the beginning. I know. Her voice lowered. But someone inside the gallery is deleting files. I straightened. What? Our contact says servers were accessed at 10:43. Evelyn. We don't know. I looked toward the duplicate envelope still resting on the table. I kept offline copies. I suspected you would. Not because I expected this. No, Rachel said softly. Because you never trusted digital archives alone. Exactly. I had learned years ago that paper remembered what people preferred to forget. Rachel hesitated. There's something else. What? The chairman wants to meet you tonight. I'll listen. Be careful. I intend to. No. Her voice became unusually serious. Be careful of the people who suddenly become your allies. Arthur Bennett chose an old concert hall cafe instead of the gallery. A neutral place. Public enough to discourage scenes. Private enough for uncomfortable truths. He stood when I arrived. For years I had known him as a distant figure who attended openings, shook donors' hands, and disappeared before closing speeches. Today he looked 10 years older. You came. You asked. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. I owe you an apology. I don't need one. You deserve one. The waiter placed tea between us. Arthur didn't touch his cup. I reviewed every document you submitted. And I should have asked questions years ago. I remained silent. He rubbed his forehead. Why didn't you tell us? I did. He frowned. When? Every annual report. He looked confused. I documented inconsistencies. I thought those were technical notes. They were. Realization slowly settled across his face. You were reporting them. I wasn't responsible for interpreting them. Arthur closed his eyes briefly. We failed you. I wasn't the only one. No. His voice became heavy. I've begun reviewing personnel records. My pulse slowed. Noah. Arthur nodded. Among others. Others. Rachel had been right. Noah hadn't been the first. Neither had I. Arthur opened a leather folder. Inside lay employment files. One after another. Artists. Conservators. Archivists. Each had resigned quietly. Each had disappeared from the institution. Each had been replaced without discussion. They all worked directly under Evelyn, he said. They all left voluntarily. Did they? He looked at me. No. Arthur slid another document across the table. It was a settlement agreement. And signed. Prepared 5 years earlier. My name appeared at the top. I stared. I've never seen this. It was drafted after the Zurich restoration incident. The room seemed colder. I was told the matter had been resolved. It hadn't. Arthur spoke carefully. Someone intended to make you personally liable. For what? The destroyed painting. I followed procedure. I know. I looked at the amount listed in the document. It exceeded everything I had earned in 12 years. My fingers tightened. They were preparing to sacrifice me. Arthur didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence confirmed more than words could. You stopped it. I never saw it. No. Arthur leaned forward. Someone removed it before legal review. Rachel. Or Noah. Or another invisible hand I still couldn't see. Who protected me? Arthur shook his head. We're trying to find out. At that moment his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed instantly. What happened? He looked up. The police. I said nothing. They've arrived at the gallery. They've requested access to the conservation vault. Arthur's voice dropped almost to a whisper. They have a warrant. A warrant. Not an inspection. Not an audit. Someone outside the board had moved first. My thoughts immediately found Rachel. She had known too much. Too early. Arthur stood abruptly. I have to go. You should. He hesitated before leaving. Liam. Yes. When all of this is over. He struggled to finish the sentence. Would you ever consider coming back? I looked through the cafe window toward the river. People crossed the bridge with umbrellas raised against the rain. Life continued. Quietly. Steadily. Just as it always had. I might return to art. I stood as well. but I won't return to the life I left. Arthur nodded once. For the first time since we had met, there was no distance between chairman and employee. Only two men recognizing the cost of ignoring the truth for too long. As he hurried into the rain, my phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Rachel. It was an unknown number. I answered. A weak male voice spoke only one sentence. Liam, it's Noah. The line went dead. I stared at the silent phone long after the call ended. The voice had been weak, older, uncertain, but there was no mistaking it. Noah Chun, a man the art world had quietly erased 8 years ago. I called the number back immediately. The number you have dialed is unavailable. Again, the same message. A third attempt. Nothing. My heartbeat remained strangely calm. Years ago, I would have rushed into action, driven across the city, demanded answers. Now I understood something experience had taught me. Panic rarely arrived before a trap. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked home instead. Rachel was already waiting outside my apartment building. She looked at my face once and frowned. You heard from him. You knew. I hoped. I thought he disappeared. So did everyone else. We climbed the stairs without another word. Inside my apartment, I spread every document we had collected across the dining table. Shipping manifests, authentication certificates, insurance claims, restoration photographs. The room slowly transformed into an investigation office. Rachel pointed toward one particular file. Look at the dates. I compared 3 separate documents. The Zurich painting, an insurance claim, a restoration log, all signed within 48 hours. Impossible. A restoration of that scale required weeks. Unless it was never restored, I murmured. Rachel nodded. They switched it before the reported damage. I looked again. The realization spread through me like cold water. The painting I believed I had damaged was already a forgery. The original had disappeared long before I ever touched it. I became the perfect witness, I said quietly. You became the perfect scapegoat. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. 12 years. Every late night. Every emergency restoration. Every crisis. Someone had always guided events just enough to keep me solving problems without ever seeing the larger picture. Not because I was foolish. Because I trusted the institution more than the people running it. Rachel slid another folder toward me. I think it's time you learned who the cropped person in that old photograph was. Inside was the uncropped image. 3 young conservators. Me, Noah, and Rachel. You worked there. For 3 years. You left before I arrived. No. She met my eyes. I was forced out. The story emerged piece by piece. 8 years earlier, Rachel had questioned missing acquisition records. Within weeks, she had been accused of leaking confidential information. There had been no trial, no investigation, only quiet pressure. Her contract had mutually ended. The board never looked deeper. After Rachel came Noah. Gifted, idealistic, far too curious. He had discovered inconsistencies between restoration reports and overseas sales. Then, suddenly, he vanished, officially burned out, unofficially forgotten. And then, Rachel said softly, "Came you?" I leaned back in my chair. So I wasn't chosen because I was talented. You were chosen because you were reliable. Reliable. The compliment that had quietly become a cage. I never questioned impossible deadlines. You solved impossible problems. I stayed. You believed loyalty would eventually be recognized. I smiled faintly. It never occurred to me that loyalty could become someone else's business model. Rachel looked almost guilty. I tried to warn Noah. What happened? He thought he could expose everything alone. The silence that followed answered the question better than words. A knock interrupted us. 3 slow knocks. Not hurried. Not aggressive. Measured. Rachel instinctively gathered the documents. I opened the door. Arthur Bennett stood outside. He looked exhausted. Behind him stood a young woman, carrying 2 archive boxes. I hope we're not interrupting. You found something. We found too much. The woman stepped forward. I'm Emily Foster. She extended a hand. The gallery's digital archivist. I recognized the name. Quiet. Precise. The kind of employee no one noticed until something broke. I copied these before anyone could erase them, she said. She placed the archive boxes on my table. Arthur looked at me. The police sealed the conservation vault 2 hours ago. What did they find? Several originals. I frowned. Originals? The paintings reported destroyed over the last decade. Rachel slowly stood. So they were hiding them. Arthur nodded. Worse. He opened one of the archive boxes. Inside rested dozens of hard drives. They weren't hiding only paintings. Emily carefully removed one drive and connected it to her laptop. I didn't access these, she said. I only copied them. The screen flickered to life. Folders, dates, client codes, international shipping records. No artwork images. Just meticulous accounting. Rachel opened one file. A spreadsheet appeared. Column after column of inventory numbers. Insurance values. Destination museums. Replacement status. Replacement. I felt my stomach tighten. Every painting was marked with one of two labels. Original. Or replica installed. The room became impossibly quiet. Arthur slowly sat down. My God, Emily whispered. This wasn't random fraud. No, I replied. It was a system. For years, wealthy collectors believed they were purchasing authenticated masterpieces. Museums displayed expertly forged replacements. Insurance companies paid claims on works declared damaged. Meanwhile, the originals disappeared into private collections. The scheme had required extraordinary technical skill. My technical skill. Without my restorations. Without my detailed reports. The replicas would never have passed inspection. I had unknowingly made the deception possible. Rachel noticed my expression. This isn't your fault. I know. Surprisingly. I truly did know. I hadn't forged signatures. I hadn't switched canvases. I hadn't stolen anything. I had simply trusted people who weaponized competence. There was a difference. A painful one. Emily opened another folder. Personnel surveillance. Photographs appeared. Employees entering archives. Late night overtime. Security footage. Someone had been documenting everyone. One video caught my attention. Timestamp. 5 years earlier. The night of the Zurich incident. The conservation room appeared on screen. I watched my younger self carefully examine the damaged painting. Minutes later, I left to retrieve specialized solvents. The room remained empty. Then, Evelyn entered. She wasn't alone. A man in an expensive charcoal suit followed her. Neither wore gloves. The man rolled the damaged painting aside. Evelyn unlocked a hidden storage cabinet. Together, they removed another canvas. Perfect. Finished. Already framed. She exchanged the paintings in less than 3 minutes. My pulse slowed rather than quickened. Every missing answer settled quietly into place. When I returned in the recording, I restored the fake, believing it was genuine, believing I had failed. Arthur covered his mouth. She let you blame yourself. For years. Rachel closed the laptop. No. She looked directly at me. She needed you blaming yourself. There was a difference. Guilt creates obedience. A man convinced he has made an unforgivable mistake rarely asks difficult questions. Another phone buzzed. Arthur answered. He listened for nearly a minute without speaking. When the call ended, he looked toward me. Evelyn's attorney has issued a statement. What kind? They're claiming the archive files were fabricated by a disgruntled former employee. Emily let out a disbelieving laugh. They're blaming Liam. Arthur nodded. Publicly. I wasn't surprised. Not even slightly. Rachel watched my face. Aren't you angry? I expected it. They're trying to destroy your reputation. They already spent 12 years trying. What will you do? I looked around the apartment. Boxes of evidence. Friends I never knew I still had. A sketchbook lying open beside the window. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Golden evening lights spread across the rooftops. I'll keep painting. Emily blinked. That's all. No. I gently closed the laptop. I'll answer every question truthfully. And Evelyn? I thought of her standing beneath the crystal chandelier on opening night, accepting applause she believed she owned forever. I won't stop her. Arthur frowned. Stop her from what? I walked to the window. Far across the skyline, television helicopters circled above the museum district. Media, police, investigators. Every institution she had once controlled was now watching. From making one more mistake. Behind me, the television in the corner suddenly interrupted its regular programming. Breaking news. A reporter stood outside the gallery. The museum's executive director, Evelyn Hale, has just announced an emergency press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. Rachel quietly whispered. She still thinks she can talk her way out. I watched the helicopters turning slowly in the evening sky. No, I said. She thinks she can perform. The television remained on long after the news segment ended. None of us spoke. We all understood what tomorrow meant. Evelyn had built her entire career on one belief. Control the story, and people will forgive almost anything. The problem was that stories became dangerous when documents started speaking louder than people. The museum district was already crowded before sunrise. Satellite vans lined both sides of the street. Journalists rehearsed their opening lines. Photographers adjusted lenses toward the front entrance. Across the road, donors, artists, collectors, and former employees gathered in uneasy clusters. No one knew exactly what had happened. Everyone knew something had. I stood on the opposite sidewalk beside Rachel, Arthur, and Emily. None of us intended to enter. Arthur had insisted. You have every right to be inside. I don't need one. They'll ask where you are. They're free to. Rachel looked at me. You really aren't going in? No. Why? I watched workers remove velvet ropes that had welcomed guests only 2 days earlier. Because this isn't my stage. At precisely 10 o'clock, Evelyn stepped before the cameras. Even from across the street, she looked composed. Navy suit, silver brooch, hair perfectly arranged. The same image that had reassured collectors for years. She smiled. Thank you all for coming. Microphones moved closer. I understand there have been many unfortunate rumors concerning our institution. Rumors. Interesting choice. She continued. Our gallery has recently experienced internal sabotage by a former employee whose resignation coincided with unauthorized removal of confidential archives. Arthur exhaled slowly. Emily muttered under her breath. There it is. My name appeared on a giant television screen outside the building. A photograph from 5 years ago. I looked exhausted in it. Perfect. An easy face to blame. Evelyn spoke gently. Mr. Liam Carter was once a valued member of our restoration department. He unfortunately became increasingly unstable under professional pressure. Rachel's jaw tightened. Arthur took one step forward. I placed a hand lightly on his arm. Let her finish. Evelyn continued without interruption. He developed personal grievances after creative disagreements. Creative disagreements. 12 years reduced to 2 words. He recently submitted altered documentation designed to damage this institution. Several reporters nodded while taking notes. She was good. Very good. Calm. Measured. Sympathetic. The audience wanted certainty. She gave them certainty. Then, one reporter raised a hand. Director Hale. Yes. The police confirmed they executed a search warrant yesterday. Her smile barely changed. We have cooperated fully. Were original artworks recovered? That matter remains under review. Another reporter spoke. Did you authorize insurance claims connected to those works? Our legal department handled administrative procedures. Questions began arriving faster. Were restoration reports falsified? Did employees report concerns previously? What happened to conservator Noah Chun? The name changed everything. For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. Only a second. But cameras love seconds. I don't believe today's conference concerns former employees. Another voice rose. Then where is Mr. Chun? I have no information. Across the street, Rachel quietly whispered. Lie. Arthur's phone vibrated. He answered immediately. His expression changed. They're here. Who? Forensic accounting. 3 black government vehicles turned onto the avenue. They stopped directly in front of the museum entrance. The crowd instinctively moved aside. Officials stepped out carrying sealed evidence cases. Television cameras abandoned Evelyn almost instantly. Every lens pivoted. Every microphone followed. The performance no longer belonged to her. One investigator approached the podium. Director Hale. She maintained her smile. Yes. We require immediate access to your executive office. I'm currently addressing the press. This cannot wait. I'll cooperate afterward. The investigator handed her a document. You'll cooperate now. She unfolded it. Read one page. Then another. The color slowly disappeared from her face. Search authorization. Asset seizure order. International cooperation notice. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. The cameras caught everything. She looked toward the board members standing near the entrance. None stepped forward. Not one. The silence surrounding her became louder than any accusation. Within minutes, investigators entered the building. No shouting. No dramatic arrests. Only disciplined professionals carrying evidence boxes through the front doors. The crowd watched in complete silence. Sometimes the quietest moments carried the greatest weight. An hour later, the atmosphere had completely changed. Reporters no longer asked Evelyn for explanations. They interviewed former employees instead. Archivists, curators, technicians, people whose voices had never mattered while everything appeared successful. Now everyone remembered something. I questioned shipping records once. I was told not to access certain vaults. There were paintings that disappeared for months. Small truths, harmless alone, devastating together. Rachel's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen before handing it to me. It's Noah. This time the connection held. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Liam, I'm here. A tired laugh came through the speaker. You sound different. So do you. I suppose 8 years will do that. I looked toward the museum entrance. Where are you? Safe. I thought. I know what everyone thought. His breathing remained uneven. I couldn't come back. You don't have to explain today. I owe you one. No. You carried my guilt. I closed my eyes briefly. No. I carried hers. The line became quiet. Then Noah said something I never expected. I'm proud of you. Those 4 words landed with surprising force. Not because I needed approval, because they came from someone who understood exactly what surviving looked like. A sudden commotion erupted near the museum doors. Evelyn had emerged again, this time without the practiced smile. An investigator walked beside her. She wasn't handcuffed. She wasn't resisting. She simply looked smaller. As she approached the waiting vehicles, reporters surrounded her. Director Hale, did you steal original paintings? Did you frame your employees? Did you authorize forged restorations? She answered none of them. Then, unexpectedly, she saw me. Across the street, standing quietly beside Rachel. For a long moment the city seemed to disappear. Traffic, helicopters, camera shutters. Everything faded. Only the distance between us remained. She walked toward the barriers separating the sidewalks. The investigator allowed it. Perhaps he understood unfinished conversations. Perhaps he simply knew she had nowhere left to run. She stopped a few feet away. You planned this. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I shook my head. No. You collected everything. I kept records. You waited. I left. You wanted this. I wanted peace. She stared at me, searching, looking for hatred, triumph, cruel satisfaction. She found none. I gave you everything, she whispered. I answered just as quietly. You gave me work. Her eyes filled for the first time. I made you. You taught me. A long silence followed. Then I finished the sentence she had never allowed me to complete during 12 years under her guidance. And eventually, I learned without you. She looked away, not because she disagreed, because she finally understood. There would be no dramatic revenge, no victory speech, no public humiliation delivered by me. The consequences had arrived through choices she herself had made. The investigator gently touched her shoulder. We need to leave. She nodded once. Without another word, she entered the waiting vehicle. The door closed. The convoy drove away. No applause followed. No cheers. Only the sound of rain beginning once again over the city. I stood there watching until the vehicles disappeared around the corner. Rachel stepped beside me. It's over. I looked toward the museum. Workers were already removing the exhibition banners that had carried Evelyn's name. For the first time in 12 years. The building looked like a gallery again, not a monument. 3 weeks passed before I entered the gallery again. Not because anyone invited me, because the building no longer felt like a battlefield. Construction barriers surrounded the main entrance. Temporary signs apologized for ongoing archival restoration. It was strangely fitting. Buildings, like people, sometimes required dismantling before they could become honest again. I stood outside for several minutes. A young security guard approached. He couldn't have been older than 25. Sir, I'm just looking. He studied my face. Recognition slowly appeared. Mr. Carter? I nodded. His expression shifted from uncertainty to respect. I've seen your picture. I'm sorry about that. He laughed awkwardly. No, not on the news. He hesitated. In the staff room. I frowned. What do you mean? They replaced the employee wall. Curiosity drew me inside. The lobby had changed. Gone were the oversized portraits celebrating executive directors and wealthy donors. In their place stood a simple exhibition. The hands behind the art. Photographs of conservators, archivists, framers, lighting technicians, volunteers, people who had spent decades invisible. Near the center hung an old photograph of the restoration department. Someone had carefully restored it. No cropped faces. Rachel stood beside Noah. I stood beside both of them. No names missing. No history erased. I smiled without realizing it. Arthur found me in the West Gallery. I had a feeling you'd come. I wasn't sure. You belong here. I belong where paintings are respected. He nodded. We're trying. He looked older than before. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of exhaustion leadership left behind when it finally accepted responsibility. The investigation? Still ongoing. And Evelyn? He took a slow breath. Several international agencies became involved. I didn't ask for details. There was nothing left for me inside that story. Arthur seemed relieved. I have something for you. He handed me a slim envelope. Inside rested a small brass key. What is this? Studio 4. I looked up. The old conservation workshop? We renovated it. I don't work here anymore. I know. He smiled gently. We're offering it as an independent artist studio. No obligations. No contracts. No ownership. You paint. If you want. For a long moment, I simply stared at the key. 12 years earlier, I would have accepted immediately. Out of gratitude. Out of loyalty. Out of fear that saying no might disappoint someone. Now, I asked the only question that mattered. Who owns what I create? Arthur smiled. You. Only then did I close my fingers around the key. Studio 4 smelled faintly of cedar and fresh plaster. The room had changed. Larger windows. Natural light. Clean walls waiting for color. Someone had placed a new easel beside the north-facing window. Nothing else. No deadlines. No exhibition schedules. No donor lists. Just space. I unpacked one canvas. Then another. Hours passed without me noticing. For the first time in years. No one interrupted. No one corrected. No one asked whether a collector would approve. When the first brushstroke touched the canvas, I stopped thinking. Not because my mind became empty, because it finally became quiet. Late that afternoon, someone knocked softly. Emily stood outside holding 2 coffees. I guessed you'd be here. You guessed correctly. She looked around the studio. It feels different. It does. She handed me a cup. The archives are finally being reorganized. How's that going? She laughed. Painfully. I imagine. We found hundreds of unsigned conservation notes. I probably wrote them. You did. She smiled. They're helping us restore proper authorship. Proper authorship. Such a simple phrase. Such an extraordinary gift. Before leaving, Emily paused. Oh. She reached into her bag. I almost forgot. She handed me a worn sketchbook. My old sketchbook. The one I thought had disappeared years ago. I found it in Evelyn's office. My fingers tightened around the cover. Inside were dozens of early studies. Ideas. Failures. Experiments. Pages I had assumed were lost forever. Tucked inside the final page rested a folded note. Written in familiar handwriting. Noah's. The paper had yellowed with age. The ink had faded slightly, but every word remained clear. If you're reading this, it means you finally stopped carrying someone else's dreams. I sat quietly by the window. Emily respectfully left without another word. The studio became silent again. I unfolded the rest of the letter. Liam, you work harder than anyone I've ever met. That's why I'm writing instead of speaking. Hard workers usually don't hear warnings until they're already exhausted. I smiled faintly. That sounded exactly like Noah. If I disappear, don't waste your life trying to understand why immediately. People like us believe every problem can be solved by working longer. Some problems survive because good people refuse to imagine deliberate cruelty. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Protect your sketches. Protect your name. Most importantly, protect the quiet part of yourself that still enjoys creating. If that disappears, no exhibition is worth saving. The letter ended with only one line. Paint something no one can own but you. I slowly folded the page. For years, I had believed success meant being indispensable. Now I understood. Freedom mattered more. The following months passed with surprising peace. The investigation continued somewhere beyond my daily life. Journalists eventually stopped calling. Collectors found new scandals. The city moved on. I didn't. Every morning, I unlocked Studio 4. Every evening, I left with paint on my hands. Not because anyone expected it. Because I wanted to. Rachel visited often. Sometimes we discussed restoration techniques. Sometimes history. Sometimes nothing at all. Silence between friends felt different from silence inside manipulation. One afternoon, she placed a newspaper on my work table. Front page headline. National Museum Reform Bill approved. New regulations required transparent authorship records. independent restoration oversight, and permanent archival documentation. I looked up. They changed the law. They had to. Rachel smiled. Too many people finally paid attention. Neither of us celebrated loudly. Real change rarely arrived with fireworks. It arrived through paperwork, policies, people quietly refusing to repeat old mistakes. Several weeks later, Arthur organized a modest exhibition. No grand opening, no celebrity guests, only artists, students, conservators, teachers. Above the entrance hung a simple title. Hands remember. Every work displayed carried complete documentation. Painter, restorer, archivist, framer. Even the people who prepared the canvas received credit. Visitors spent longer reading the labels than I expected. One elderly woman approached me after studying my landscape. I've never seen restorers acknowledged before. They deserve to be. She smiled warmly. So do painters. I smiled back. So does everyone who tells the truth. Near closing time, Arthur joined me beneath my largest painting. The harbor at sunrise. Quiet water. Empty docks. Soft golden light touching weathered wood. He studied it for a long time. It reminds me of your first day. I barely remember it. I do. He chuckled. You arrived carrying twice as many brushes as necessary. I was nervous. You apologized for taking up space. I looked at the painting. I won't do that again. Arthur nodded. I know. Across the gallery, visitors continued moving slowly from painting to painting. Nobody rushed. Nobody searched for famous names. They simply looked. Really looked. For the first time in many years. That was enough. Winter arrived quietly. Snow gathered along the museum steps where reporters had once fought for space. The helicopters were gone. The television vans had disappeared months ago. Even the loudest scandals eventually surrendered to ordinary life. I welcomed that. Studio 4 had become less of a workplace and more of a home. Not because I lived there, because every unfinished canvas reminded me that tomorrow still existed. I was cleaning brushes one afternoon when Arthur called. Liam, how are you? Tired. You sound better. I think that's what tired is supposed to sound like. I smiled. There will be one final hearing next week. I stopped wiping the brush. I thought everything had already been decided. Most of it has. He hesitated. But the court requested testimony from former department heads. You want me there. I want to give you the choice no one gave you before. Choice. A simple word. Once, I would have mistaken it for obligation. Now I understood the difference. I'll come. The courthouse stood only a few blocks from the gallery. Gray stone. Tall windows. No photographers. The public had already lost interest. Justice often arrived long after attention had moved elsewhere. Rachel waited beside the entrance. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. I know. No one expects a dramatic confrontation. I wouldn't know how to give one. She laughed softly. I know. Inside, the hearing proceeded with surprising calm. Experts presented records. Archivists explained document chains. Insurance investigators summarized years of financial deception. Everything sounded strangely ordinary. Fraud, forgery, concealment. Words that had once ruled my life now occupied only official transcripts. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand. The judge looked at me. Mr. Carter, Your Honor, you supervised restoration projects under Ms. Hale? Yes. Were you aware of the fraudulent exchanges? No. Did you later preserve documentation relevant to this investigation? Yes. Why? I considered the question carefully. Not because I needed time. Because the truthful answer deserved precision. I believed records belonged to history. The judge nodded once. No further questions. That was all. No speeches. No accusations. Just the truth. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I noticed Evelyn for the first time. She looked older. Not because of prison uniforms or dramatic circumstances. She wasn't wearing one. She simply looked empty. The certainty that had once surrounded her had disappeared. She watched me approach the courtroom exit. Liam. I paused. Rachel instinctively slowed several steps ahead, but didn't interfere. Evelyn's voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I've replayed everything. I waited. I keep wondering. She struggled to finish. When I lost you, I answered honestly. You never had me. Her eyes lowered. I thought success required sacrifice. It does. She looked up hopefully. I continued. But it should always be your own. Silence settled between us. No anger remained. No satisfaction either. Only two people acknowledging a truth that had arrived too late. I'm sorry, she whispered. For years, I had imagined hearing those words. I thought they might heal something. Instead, they simply sounded human. I believe you. She blinked. You do? Yes. Another silence. But believing you doesn't change what happened. She slowly nodded. I know. The bailiff called her name. She stood. For a brief moment. The woman who had once filled entire galleries with confidence looked like nothing more than another person carrying the weight of her own choices. Then she walked away. I didn't watch her leave. There was no reason to. Spring returned to the city almost unnoticed. Cherry blossoms lined the riverside where Rachel and I often shared coffee after work. The gallery had reopened months earlier under new leadership. It no longer called itself a monument to visionary directors. Instead, it described itself as a place where artists, conservators, historians, and communities met. The difference mattered, more than anyone outside the profession would ever realize. One Saturday morning, Studio 4 welcomed its first group of apprentices. Not employees, not assistants, students. Some were painters, some specialized in restoration. Others simply loved art enough to spend weekends learning how fragile beauty could be. A young man nervously raised his hand. Master Carter? I smiled. Just Liam. He looked embarrassed. How do you know when a painting is finished? The room became quiet. Everyone waited. I set down my brush. When it no longer needs you to become someone else. Several students exchanged puzzled looks. One young woman tilted her head. I don't understand. I used to think paintings existed to impress people. I looked around the bright studio. Sunlight streamed through the same north-facing windows that had first welcomed me back months ago. Now I think they're conversations. With who? Yourself. The students became thoughtful. No one hurried to write the answer down. Good. Some lessons shouldn't become notes immediately. They should become experience. That evening, after everyone left, I walked alone through the gallery. The harbor painting still hung in the central room. Its label was longer now. Artist, Liam Carter. Conservation preparation, Emily Foster. Archival documentation, Rachel Song. Exhibition coordination, museum restoration team. Every contribution acknowledged. Every name visible. Exactly as it should be. An elderly visitor stopped beside me. It's beautiful. Thank you. I especially like the label. I looked at him curiously. The label? He smiled. It reminds people that important things are rarely created alone. I followed his gaze. For years I had feared sharing credit because I had lived beneath someone who stole it. Now I understood. Sharing credit and surrendering it were never the same thing. As dusk settled outside, I locked Studio 4 for the evening. The brass key Arthur had given me months earlier felt comfortably worn in my hand. Across the river, lights reflected on calm water. The same river I had crossed the morning after walking away from the greatest exhibition of my life. Back then, I believed I was leaving everything behind. I had been wrong. I wasn't leaving art. I wasn't leaving purpose. I wasn't leaving myself. I was only leaving the place where my work had stopped belonging to me. The city breathed quietly around me. Somewhere behind those streets, people still argued about masterpieces. Collectors still chased fame. Critics still searched for genius. They were free to. Tomorrow morning, I would unlock Studio 4 again. Mix fresh paint. Stretch a new canvas. Teach another student. Begin another conversation. Not because anyone expected greatness, but because creating honestly had finally become enough. And for the first time in my life, that quiet truth belonged entirely to me.